All right, thank you everybody for joining us. This is going to be an excellent discussion covering three mega trends in digital assets in 30 minutes is going to be challenging, particularly when you've got a panel with so much experience. Despite what it says on the screen, we've got people here who've worked for the US government. In fact, I think everybody's worked for the US government at some point in this space. We've got authors and the list goes on. We're going to step through one mega theme each and take it from there. And then given the background of this team, we'll start getting into what the macroeconomic and geopolitical environment means for these trends as we go. So let's get started. I'm going to start with Emily introducing us to her mega theme for digital assets.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to keep this very, very mega. I would say the mega trend that I see starting last year and moving into 2024 is basically crypto grows up. And what that means is crypto is, went from being this kind of like rebellious, decentralized, ideological thing to something that now has a lot more involvement from governments and institutions. And when I say crypto grows up, there's a lot of facets to this. So, for example, we're seeing there's good and there's bad. I'm going to start with some of the good. We're seeing increased regulatory clarity. And I think we are seeing that the winners in sort of crypto when it comes to global regulation will be the jurisdictions that have more regulatory clarity. And that's very relevant because we're here in Tokyo and Japan is one of the leaders, I think, in crypto regulation because the rules are very clear. Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, these are kind of in my view, the digital asset hubs of the future. And the reason for that is not because it's easy to do business there. It absolutely is not easy to do business in any of those places, but they are relatively clear and straightforward. So we're seeing, governments and all three of those governments embrace digital assets to a certain degree. The ETF conversation is quite relevant here. As we all know, spot Bitcoin ETFs were finally approved in the United States. And you can see, obviously, we never know for sure what impacts the price of Bitcoin, but I think it's pretty fair to say that there's some sort of correlation here because we saw Bitcoin price rising in anticipation of ETF approvals, and you can see where Bitcoin is today. And this is a very interesting thing, and I hope we can get into this conversation a little bit later because for sort of crypto purists, this is a little bit of a mixed thing, right? Because if you look at an ETF and you look at the Bitcoin white paper, for example, basically ETFs are kind of everything that Bitcoin was not supposed to be. Like we should just sort of be very clear about that, right? The Bitcoin white paper specifically talks about a decentralized cryptocurrency that does not need any third-party intermediation, that doesn't rely on financial institutions, doesn't rely on governments. An ETF is intermediated, and it's a very, very different form. So it's a little bit of a, for me personally, I think it's a little bit of a mixed result. The other thing we're seeing is increased government involvement in sort of the crypto sphere. And that plays out in a lot of different ways. As I mentioned, there's a few governments that are kind of embracing digital assets, but we're also seeing, for example, central bank digital currencies. A lot of countries exploring central bank digital currencies. China is kind of at the lead, even though it seems to have been slowing down recently. So you sort of see governments kind of taking the aspects of blockchain technology that they like and sort of, shunning the aspects that they don't like so much, such as the decentralization. So anyway, I want to leave this to my other panelists to discuss more, but I feel like I think this is mixed. I think on the one hand, we've seen that for crypto to reach mainstream adoption, we probably do need some degree of approval by Wall Street or by governments. We saw that with the ETFs. Like, even if you don't like ETFs, it's like the industry was kind of floundering a little bit, and so this really gave it a boost. But on the other hand, I think the thing to look at going forward is how do we have all these things, government involvement, Wall Street involvement, without having crypto lose what makes it special in the first place? So when I say this is a mega trend, I don't think it's 100% positive. I think it's moving maybe in a positive direction, but I think there are things to look out for also.
I think that's a brilliant trend highlighting crypto growing up, something that I think has been needed, but also has been happening slowly in the ecosystem. But this past year really has been a huge marker for it. I've seen tons of interesting innovations focused on trying to build in dynamic compliance features across different types of digital asset systems. Very important, given that I came from FinCEN, the U.S. anti-money laundering regulator, and at the White House, issues of crypto abuse were a massive point of priority. So I totally agree that we're seeing these kinds of trends and this implementation being a focus of devs in a way that I've never really seen start to scale until now.
And I think building on that, the fact is that institutions are moving in. I think this was what probably a lot in people in the digital asset space had hoped for 1 or 2 cycles ago. We thought that they were just shunning the entire industry and that regulators just wanted to completely, ignore it or ban it or hope it goes away. But the fact is that throughout the crypto winter, they have been building. There are firms that have worked on ETFs. There are, I take note of Citadel, Fidelity, and Charles Schwab launching an exchange. These are not sort of people who dabble in things. These are large institutions that have both, customers like hedge funds to retail users in investment. I think that changes the story and the direction of where it's going to go. And I think we're just at the very, very beginning of that.
So for me, if I was to paraphrase horrendously, this is sort of a story about legitimacy and adoption to some extent. Emily, to sort of conclude your theme, are we at a tipping point? Is this the moment we get some inflection and see adoption?
That's a great question, and I think I have some more thoughts about that later. But I do think it's a tipping point. There's something I forgot to mention, which is Binance. I think what happened with Binance last year, which you guys all know, CZ resigning, basically having to pay a hefty fine. I think that was an end of an era, and I think that was the end of the era of borderless crypto exchanges, because Binance was like a really unique animal. I mean, Binance still exists, but Binance, the way that it was, where, for example, if you ask CZ, where is Binance based, where are you base, and he'd be like, oh, what is a base? Like that I think that era is really over, because I just don't think we will ever see another crypto exchange of that size. Maybe there'll be smaller ones that like slip through the cracks, but of that size that can operate sort of like without its jurisdiction and without kind of like, a specific regulator watching over it. So in that sense, I think it's an end of an era. But for mainstream adoption, like, I think we still have a little bit of a ways to go. I think what we've seen is that people like convenience and they like ease and they like to understand things. And that's why the ETFs have been successful, because they're like still nervous about using a cryptocurrency exchange. Some people, right? Some retail investors don't want to use a cryptocurrency exchange. They feel more secure using a traditional whatever brokerage, however they would access an ETF. But I think that raises a larger question, which is like, if people are still nervous about crypto exchanges, why would they use like their own wallet? Why would they use self-custody? So that, I think that shows that we're still pretty far from mainstream adoption if we kind of need an ETF to get more people into the market.
Yeah, I love the point that you made about exchanges operating without a jurisdiction. How we're at the end of this. Like there continues to be growth of focus on regulation. You mentioned government involvement and regulation internationally. The FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is kind of like the UN for anti-money laundering, the international standards body for illicit finance, has been really focused on trying to drive implementation of these standards that we pushed and adopted 5 years ago. There's still major lagging happening in implementation. Although nations like Japan were some of the leading voices in developing those standards and setting those regulations, but they did just come out with a report highlighting that they have concrete steps that they're hoping to help push and drive greater adoption, which I think will help through creating a regulatory framework that is clear and understood and gives victims recourse when there's illicit finance or fraud that affects them. I think is going to drive the kind of consumer trust that you need for broader adoption.
Perfect. And maybe whilst you've got your microphone, let's stick with you, Carole, and go into megatrend number 2. Take us away.
Yes, I'm going to use as many buzzwords here as possible. I know we were just talking about AI on the prior panel. So it's the convergence of blockchain technology with AI. I think it's the beginning of a trend. This past year, obviously, AI picked up as a huge point of discussion around the world. And I would say that first, AI has been around for a while. If you were not using AI or leveraging it, you weren't competing effectively in finance. But what was really special this past year was the democratized access to extremely highly sophisticated and high-level compute capacity via these AI models. And in my view, blockchain and AI are coming to a really interesting point of convergence where both of these technologies reinforce a lot of the best features of each other. They also reinforce a lot of the worst and darkest features of each other. So, for example, blockchain technology, which is so great at, it's operating as essentially a database technology and being able to record in an immutable way lots of information. AI needing to be able to leverage that information and to trust it and to understand when it's being manipulated. blockchain can be a part of the answer to some of the weaknesses in AI when you have problems with explainability and transparency, and enabling interoperability, and access to a significant amount of data. So I think that we're seeing that as a really great area where blockchain can help fill a gap for AI, and then challenges for scalability that blockchain has had. AI is able to fill some of those gaps by being able to provide greater high-level compute capacity. And I think that the convergence of these two technologies is going to drive incredible commercial developments, whether it's focusing on things like trading, but frankly, a lot of other development and automated code writing and product development. And I just think that there's a huge amount of capacity there. We've seen it in compliance solutions as well, being able to leverage AI in order to oversee and detect where there are malicious exploits happening or where some operational vulnerabilities are occurring, where there's cyber risks, where there's illicit finance occurring. I think that we're going to continue to see that convergence. On the negative feature side, since I know as a national security person, frankly, all of us are. So we're very good at painting the most dangerous picture, the worst case scenario. Also, the challenges with each other, I think, could be reinforced by the other. So challenges with blockchain technology. Right now, most of them operate on public, unobscured ledgers. I think with the propagation and democratized access to really great AI, it's possible that that a lot of the currently proprietary closed clustering algorithms that analytics firms are using to identify who's actually associated with that could become open source within, I don't know, I'll just say 5 to 10 years. And so the privacy issues implicated by public ledgers and posting your financial information on a public ledger, I think could present a problem if we don't actually implement privacy enhancing technologies on these ledgers. Also, the features for decentralization that create major challenges for identifying clear lines of accountability and responsibility can create some major concerns for being able to, I think, to be able to mitigate risks presented by really highly sophisticated AIs that are deployed on blockchain platforms. Imagine if you have a really sophisticated AI capability deployed on a decentralized network, and then it starts to manifest all of its risks of bias, of pro-cyclicality. So whether it's just risks of operational issues or it's being directly used for malicious cyber operations, my ability to take it down, to do anything about it, is mitigated when it's on a decentralized network. So this is my worst case scenario. Like, what do I do for a malicious botnet that's like deployed and operating on a decentralized network, on not just a couple of servers, but operating on 1,000 mobile devices and servers around the world? This is a concern that I have. So the issues around governance and responsibility in decentralization are something that I think have to be addressed related to the convergence of these two. Yep.
Well, let me add, I think, three things I think about with AI and blockchain. The first is that in a future state of a Gen AI world, it will be machine-to-machine transactions. And it will be really odd for, Alpha to speak with Omega and then call up the human and say, hey, can you send me some money via wire? So most likely the transactions that will take place will be some form of digital money. So that's one. The second piece is one of the biggest challenges of what we deal with today in society is misinformation and disinformation. And this is where the blockchain technology becomes really helpful in terms of cataloging and documenting. Imagine photos that are taken by the AFP of, the prime minister doing something, and you can document that. You can actually codify location, when, who took the photo, who's the photographer, what camera they used, and it's on a public ledger as opposed to sitting in a database by the AFP or Nikkei or somewhere else. And then you can see if there are future pictures that are generated. Are they the same one if the prime minister is doing something else, right? So that's the second piece. And then the third piece, tying the two together, is a lot of AI models, LLMs, are essentially vacuuming up information to create a model to generate new things. And the question around the IP and the monetization of that hasn't really been answered yet. I think New York Times have struck a deal with Google in terms of allowing this content to be scraped. Essentially, if you have a public blockchain where information is then logged on there, it's not hard to imagine a smart contract come into place and say, hey, if you're picking up the data that references this, you have to compensate the creator or the owner of that particular IP.
Yeah, I think that was great, both of you. And Carole, it's always great to be at panels with you because I think it's become kind of this cliche that like all these crypto and blockchain people are like pivoting to AI because it's like the next hot thing. And so it's actually really refreshing to hear somebody talk about this in a sophisticated way. I guess my response would be just kind of to paraphrase, I think, at a very simple level, what both of you said is it seems to me that like one of the benefits for AI, not just that it's like a new thing to do for crypto people, one of the benefits for AI is that, we're seeing a lot of this concern now about like, it's very hard to tell what's real, what's AI generated, who's the originator. And in theory, this is what blockchain's supposed to do, right? Blockchain's supposed to be kind of like this truth machine where you can, we can validate forever, like who actually originated this content. This can tell a fake from a real one. But the flip side of it, which I think you were both, you were getting at a little bit, is that, the whole idea of like, people sometimes talk about blockchain like it's a magic bullet in this sense, but there's a real downside, which is like, what if the information is wrong? Or what if the information is malicious? And then how do you get it down? And I think that's something that like really, is that people tend to gloss over a lot. It's like, oh yeah, in blockchain, you can establish that it was this guy's house, it's his deed, and it's on the blockchain forever. But it's like, well, how did you did you actually verify that it was actually that guy's house, and who decided that? You know what I mean? So I think that's sort of the downside that, is important to think about.
So I'm going to lobby Elevandi that this is a major theme in the next time we all get together, the convergence of AI and blockchain, and happily volunteer my panelist time to keep talking about that in the breaks. Let's move on to megatrend number 3. Yam-Kee, take us away.
Well, I think originally I was going to talk about regulatory clarity, but Emily already covered it. So the third theme that I think is happening is actually the improvement of the UX UI of Web3, quote unquote Web3. We're still very, very early in our industry. We're in the dial-up stage of Web3. So if you were to think back to the 1990s of what getting on the internet was like, you have to get a modem, you have to like find an ISP, you have to, go to either, if you're in the US, AOL, CompuServe, Prodigy, what have you, to like log on and kind of wait there. And then you have to tell your friends or your mother, depending on how old you were at the time, get off the phone. And that was very clunky. And that's where we are with digital assets. It's really difficult for a developer or for an average person to say, go get a wallet. It's like, what wallet do I get? And then what do you mean it's a wallet that sits on a phone but not on my computer, or it's on my computer but not on my phone, and it's not like physically anywhere? And then to explain to them, well, you need to get a wallet that can do Ethereum. And then they like have this new game that says, oh, you got to go do it on Polygon. And like, what? I just got a wallet. What do you mean I got a new wallet? And then if you were to do transactions, to explain to them, hey, to send $100 of USDC, you can choose different rails. You can choose Ethereum and you pay in ETH, and it's 0.02 ETH. And if you do it in Polygon, it's Matic. It's 0.034 Matic. And one settles in 2 minutes, the other at 3 milliseconds. And the user's like, what the hell is that? And where do I buy ETH? And where do I buy Matic? I thought I was sending USDC. So all of this stuff gets really complicated. And there are technologies that are being built around programmable wallets to embed essentially a Web3 wallet into a Web2 experience, because Web2 companies are really good at reducing friction. And then the other piece is abstracting away the gas fees, essentially converting the network fees on a particular network into something like a USDC, right? So it's easy for people to understand. You move 100 USDC, it's going to cost you 5 cents here, or 2 cents here, or you need to buy some sort of good and do some sort of transaction, it's 50 cents. It's known, people can compare, and that makes it easy not only for the retail users, but frankly for the many, many, many developers that are in the Web 2 world that have not yet developed on Web 3. How do we bring them on board? And once the regulatory clarity comes into place, the compliance piece comes into place, and this UX comes into place, and the institutions come into place, we're getting to a really different world of, I think, essentially moving to the broadband stage of digital asset and the new economy that'll be created from that.
Perfect. And I'm conscious of time. We've got sort of 5 minutes, and I do want to make the best of the fact that we have all of these government experience, coverage of Asia, etc., to talk about geopolitical and macro trends. Just a shameless plug for a session this afternoon where we're digging into exactly what Yam Ki is talking about on institutional adoption. So please come and continue the conversation there. So maybe a quick fire 5-minute discussion across the panel on what we're seeing, right? So we're in a unfamiliar macroeconomic situation. We're seeing all sorts of new releases like the ETFs that Emily talked about. There's geopolitical tension in a way that there hasn't been for a while. There's big governmental shifts. There's all sorts of changes in the way that we operate as a global economy. What does this mean for our ecosystem? What does it mean for digital assets? Is this going to accelerate us? Is it going to hold us back? Or is there something more nuanced going on?
I definitely think that development is going to continue to grow and accelerate. I think it'll be driven a lot by at the same time the convergence of AI and capabilities that can enable that production and development. On the government side, we're going to continue to see the growth that Emily spoke to. I think more broadly on some of the geopolitical issues right now. On internet governance, we're not moving towards a space of less accountability, at least not in the U.S. government landscape. There's whether it's hearings on the Hill focused on social media platform and data use and accountability, or efforts by the U.S. and the EU focused on how we regulate things like AI, or just even outside of financial activity, but in general tech and digital infrastructure and goods, we're not moving away from areas of accountability and responsibility. So what I'm really interested to see is how a focus on things like responsibility inside of decentralized networks looks like. In Japan here, I think at the close of last year, there was a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, basically a decentralized governance model for blockchain platforms. For those not familiar with it, there was a rulemaking hackathon. What a cool idea! Gosh, I hope my old agency considers doing that. But that's like, if it's about rulemaking, it's definitely about responsibility. So I think looking at what accountability and responsibility looks like, whether it's digital infrastructure or the financial applications built on top of it, is going to continue to be an area of focus, and it's an area that we need to figure out how to get right.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with all that, and also I just want to comment, just respond a little bit to some of the stuff that Yam Ki said, because I think No, in a good way. Good.
Something wrong.
Yeah, that was just totally wrong. No, it was. I think that's the point about kind of like, UX and mainstream adoption is really important, because, as we've seen, there's still like a real gap for like the average person in using cryptocurrency. But I want to sort of talk about how that extends to the regulatory sphere as well. I think one of the things we've seen over the past year, and we saw this again with the ETFs, is that I don't think crypto needs government to survive. I mean, crypto can exist without government, but it probably needs some degree of government approval to reach mainstream adoption, right? We've seen this. And the United States is a perfect example, because, there's been so much criticism of the SEC and Gary Gensler in particular for being, hostile to crypto. And we are hearing a lot of stories about crypto projects avoiding the United States, et cetera. And then we also saw the huge anticipation of SEC basically approving ETFs. So there is some degree that I think in some ways is a demonstration that we need governments to be on board, at least sort of. But in order to get to that point, I think the UX thing is a really, really important element of it. But there's something else that goes, I think, even deeper than that, which is that I think the industry kind of needs to make a better argument for why crypto needs to exist. We're still pretty far from that. I think like there's just, and the reason why that's important is because regulators need to understand why crypto exists, and that it's not just like a casino. And I think there's some regulators and in the United States that just can't really see that. And I think, and the problem is we've had a slew, especially last year, of negative headlines, FTX, I mean, the past few years, FTX, Terra Luna, Celsius. And so we need more use cases, like real use cases, like people actually using these things, and what problems are these actually trying to solve. And I think we're still a little bit far from that when it comes to mainstream adoption.
I think my closing bit will be bringing together some of the government experience and also digital asset is in geopolitics, in the world that we live in now, it's fundamentally a trustless world, right? If you're a realist, you look out the world and there are countries that would attack you, people that want to start a trade war with you. Things are uncertain. And in geopolitics, there have been, in the last 40, 50 years, like a trend to figure out how do we set up trust structures within that, whether that's through the UN, the IMF, the Bretton Woods system, etc. And some of them have worked for a period of time. Some of them probably need some upgrading, and then new ones will get created, whether that's trade agreements or other things. It's actually not that different on the internet world, where each of the protocol is trustless, whether it's TCP/IP, where any node can get an IP address and be able to transact or connect with another, SMTP to be able to send email, and POP to be able to receive email, and then HTTP and so on and so forth. But in each of these, we have to learn, how do we build trust in this trustless world? Because the internet is also a really dangerous place. How do we make sure that we're connecting with the right computers or the right applications? And there's some learnings there from sort of the tech companies. So I think over time, there will be a differentiation between trusted parties and non-trusted parties, and then people will have to figure out who they want to be able to transact with.
Perfect, thank you. We're at the top of our time. Digital assets is an extraordinarily complicated and interesting ecosystem. Hopefully the trends described today help highlight some of the forces that are driving how it evolves and how it's adopted. I will again shamelessly offer my panelists time for discussions in the networking break. Please come and spend their time wisely. And please join me in thanking them once again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay.